Your Olympic hero has arrived. It's true, it's true.
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Red-Eye Responds. My voice is a little bit off today, so apologies for that in advance. But today I will be responding to some more of those unpopular opinions videos. You know, top 10 unpopular opinions and top 10 more unpopular opinions. This time from a somewhat obscure YouTube channel by the name of Yoshi Player. And Yoshi Player himself has 7,000 subscribers, just over. He's actually gone up by about 4,000 since I first saw these videos. He's getting, you know, some appreciation, but I thought since I am responding to him, it's only fair that I shout him out because he's not a huge channel. But because he seems like a pretty cool YouTuber, I think he definitely deserves some appreciation. I've watched only a couple of his videos, including these, so, you know, there is that. But he seems like he's got his stuff pretty well made. So, without further ado, let's jump into it.
What? My top 10 unpopular opinions. These are the opinions I have that not too many people share. And truth be told, some of these opinions other people may agree on, but I mean the vast majority of people wouldn't agree on these opinions.
I'm gonna tell you, in these videos, because again I'm doing this to two of his videos, this and then his second part, I agree with actually quite a few of these opinions, and I disagree with quite a few, and then there's also quite a few I have no opinion on. So for the ones I don't have opinion on, I will be skipping them, but the videos will be in the description if you want to watch his entire videos at your leisure. But for now, let's move ahead to the first one that I actually have an opinion on.
Aside from the obvious, which is Frozen, another animated movie from them that I consider hugely overrated is The Little Mermaid.
See, I actually really do like The Little Mermaid, but I can kind of get where he's coming from on this. I think most Disney movies are kind of overrated in all honesty, but The Little Mermaid's a pretty good one. It's definitely not my favorite of the classic 2D ones, but I can see why he'd say that too. I kind of agree. Though, like I said, I do personally really like it.
This movie is actually worse than Frozen.
What the fuck?
Okay, I can't agree with that. I completely disagree with that. It is not worse than Frozen, but go ahead, continue.
First off, let's talk about the main character, Ariel. She is such a bitch in this movie. She's such a flawed character.
See, again, once again, I do kind of get where he's coming from, but also flawed characters are sometimes much more likable because of their flaws. Again, I get where he's coming from, but I would not say that she's, like, such an unlikable bitch that it ruins the movie. Not like Scarlett O'Hara, because, as I've said, Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind ruins that movie for me, personally, because she's such an unlikable cunt. But I never got that vibe with Ariel, but I'll let him elaborate.
She lives under the water, and she basically has whatever she wants. She has all this jewelry, she has this little collection, she has a pretty damn good life. But apparently for her, that's not enough, because when she meets someone on land, she instantly falls in love with him.
Okay, again, I kind of get where he's coming from with this, but I think that that's a bit of an unfair assessment. It's more the boredom and monotony of it, because if you have everything you want, you are going to be bored and not actually, you know, desire anything. So when you come across something different like that, of course you're going to be drawn to it. And I myself, admittedly, am kind of cynical when it comes to romance, but I'll admit, you know, love at first sight is a great concept. I don't necessarily know if I believe in it or not, but I do think that in the context of a fictional, you know, fairy tale-like story, I don't have a problem with it. And I think that it's actually a very sweet thing that happens in The Little Mermaid. So, again, I don't really see that as a problem.
And no, not for any other reason, is just because he has good looks.
I mean, here's the thing. All relationships start with a base level attraction. You're kidding yourself if you don't think that's true. Every relationship starts with a base level attraction. Now, you can get past not being attracted to someone if you develop a relationship to them prior with that, but before being romantically interested. But really, the first thing that you're going to notice with people is their appearance. I mean, it's superficial, but it's true. It's human nature.
In this movie, Ariel basically almost gives up her life just so she can try to be with someone she doesn't even know.
Again, I get completely what he's saying, but the concept of, you know, true love and shit like that is very common in fairy tale type things, which is ultimately what The Little Mermaid is. So, I think it is a bit unfair, but I also do kind of agree with him. Like, I kind of agree, but I kind of disagree. When you're looking at a kid's movie and a fairy tale, and I'm not going to use the excuse that kids' movies can't be good, because I think that's a retarded argument when you criticize kids' movies for people to say, well, it's a kids' movie, so you can't criticize it, because that's bullshit. So that's why I also do kind of agree with him, but I also think he is being a bit unfair in it, because I do think that in fairy tale romances, that's almost always how it goes. Prince Charming falls for the princess falls for Prince Charming. They've met, like, once. That's just how fairy tales tend to be, so, you can kind of overlook it when you know what you're getting into.
But that's not the only issue I have too. Some people say a lot of the songs are really enjoyable. Really, the only song I remember tapping my feet to is the Under the Sea song. Everything else was just forgettable in my opinion.
Well, that really comes down to a matter of taste, because I personally think there's actually quite a few good songs for the movie. Kiss the Girl, Part of Your World, and of course Under the Sea. Admittedly, those are the only three I can remember. If there were more, I don't remember them. But regardless, I do think at least those three are memorable in my taste. But again, I think that really just comes down to a matter of taste. Now, his next entry, I don't really have an opinion on the main part of that, but I do have an opinion on one thing he says in it.
Some of them even put it as their #1 worst Disney animated movie. Really? People think this movie's worse than fucking Chicken Little?
See, that's the thing I'm talking about, is I fucking love Chicken Little. I've never understood why people despise Chicken Little so much. I think Chicken Little's fine. I love Chicken Little. Because I've never understood people saying that that's, like, the worst Disney movie. I thought Chicken Little was great.
Chicken Little, though? Worth all the bashing indeed.
Again, I completely fucking disagree. I love Chicken Little. I think that that's something that I never understood why it gets so hated.
Number 7 is one that I'm sure many people are gonna bash me for saying, but it's the fact that I don't think Minecraft is a very good game.
Hey, I agree with you again for the most part on this. I actually think Minecraft itself, for what it intends to be, does it really well. But as far as to my own personal tastes, I don't particularly care for it. Although I have enjoyed playing it in the past, and I have even done a stream of it because Corbin kept pressuring me to do it, it's definitely not the worst thing in the world, and I've overhated on it myself. But I do kind of agree, Minecraft is a very overrated game. But that said, for what it is, it does it really well.
Let me again say this. I'm not saying Minecraft is an awful video game. I can understand why people would like this game, but from my personal experience, I just thought the game was boring.
See, we're kind of in the same boat on that. I agree with him more or less, because I think that it's really something that is very specific to your taste. And if you want to use it to be creative and stuff like that, I get that. And like I said, I have enjoyed playing it in the past. I did enjoy playing it a lot when it first came out on the Xbox 360, but I do think that after a while I got bored with it myself as well. So again, I agree for the most part with what he's saying.
I think the main reason is just because not much really happens in this game.
I think we get the gist of the Minecraft segment, but one final thing I will say is that's kind of the point. It's not supposed to be a game where a lot of things happen. It's just kind of this creative sandbox where you just kind of build your own world. So I think he might have missed the point a little bit on Minecraft, so I just wanted to say that. Because like I said, I do not necessarily hate it, and I used to be harsher on it than I currently am. But I do agree that it is overrated. But I do think that he doesn't maybe get the point of Minecraft, because it's not supposed to be like a super, like, adventure game. It's not something where something is really supposed to happen. You're just supposed to make things happen yourself.
I get that's the point of Minecraft, that you're just exploring these different areas, but it gets so dull and repetitive and boring in my opinion.
I know I said I was done with Minecraft, but since he did say that, I guess he does kind of get the point. But again, I do think he also kind of missed it. But I do kind of agree it does get boring after a while and repetitive. But again, I do think that comes down to a matter of taste that we both seem to share the opinion on. But yeah, enough with Minecraft, let's move on.
Every video gamer has their favorite game console. A lot of people prefer the Nintendo 64. A lot of people prefer the GameCube. A lot of people prefer the PlayStation 2. A lot of people prefer the Xbox 360. But in my personal opinion, I prefer the Wii.
Yeah, no, I completely disagree with him on this one. I think the Wii's kind of bad. I mean, I think that a lot of people agree on that. And that's why he says it's an unpopular opinion, so fair enough. But I understand the appeal of the Wii. I just think that it wasn't my thing, you know what I mean? Like, there's a few good games on the Wii, and the Wii has its appeal and charm because it was like, it popularized motion gaming. But I'm not really the biggest fan of motion gaming. You know, I like the Wii to an extent. Because, you know, I've played some games on the Wii that were fun, but it's something that I never put an extended period of time into, because for me, it was never, like, that great. I do think it's because I don't really care for the direction a lot of Nintendo franchises have gone in. Because a lot of them, even the ones that I really like, have kind of just stayed the same. And it's like, I'd rather just go back and play the older games. And then the ones that have changed, I don't care for the changes. So for me, it's just a matter of not being super into Nintendo and not particularly liking motion gaming. But let's see what he has to say.
The reason why this particular console is my personal favorite of all time is because this was one of the first consoles where everyone could play it. It was a long time before my whole family were able to play video games again.
See, and I think that's a fundamental difference between what we want in games. I don't care if everyone can play it. There's a lot of people in my family that don't like video games, and frankly, I wouldn't want to play it with them. That doesn't mean I don't want to hang out with those people in my family, but we'd rather watch a movie together or something. For instance, my dad, he doesn't play any video game except Wolfenstein 3D. And granted, he's helped me with that, because when I was first getting into playing Wolfenstein 3D, he helped me, find a bunch of secrets and stuff. So, I think that, stuff like that is the best connection I've had with, someone in my family on video games, with the exception of my brothers, because, we always played Xbox and PlayStation and stuff together, but, I don't really care if just anyone can play it, because, that, for me, it doesn't matter how inclusive a hobby is to, every demographic. For me, it's just about, is it enjoyable to the demographic it's going for? And that's not to be gatekeepy and say that I think that that it should only be targeted towards a specific demographic. But for me personally, it's just a matter of if it interests me. So I think it's just a fundamental difference in what we want in video games. It also probably has to do with the fact that I'm much more of a single-player kind of guy than a multiplayer kind of guy. I do like multiplayer, but single-player games tend to be my preferred experience.
But the Wii had a lot of advantages too. You could play games online. You could actually play old video games.
I mean, playing games online is like par for the course on all consoles, and I'd argue that the Wii actually had very shitty online play compatibility. Out of the consoles that were out at the time, the Wii, the Xbox 360, and the PS3, the Nintendo Online was very limited and actually was nothing in comparison, so I don't see how you're using that as a backing point. But also, Xbox has had Xbox Live Arcade. They have backwards compatibility, so I think that that's kind of a moot point if you're trying to use it in favor of the Wii, as opposed to, Xbox 360 and PS3. Now, granted, maybe you're just saying that in comparison to older Nintendo consoles or previous generations in general, but if you're also talking about previous generations in general, the PS2 had online play if you had the add-on, and the original Xbox had Xbox Live, so, again, still, in my opinion, kind of a moot point.
You can even use the GameCube controller for a few of the games. That's insane!
So?
See, again, I don't see that as a valid, point in comparison to other consoles, because the PS2 lets you use consoles from the PS1, it lets you use memory cards from the PS1, although you have only for PS1 games, mind you. It lets you play PS1 games completely. Like, PS2, literally everything is backwards compatible. The power cable, the AV cables, the controllers, the memory cards, the games, literally everything in it is backwards compatible. So, again, the PS2 has it beat on that and all fronts. That said, I'm also not trying to say what your favorite console should or shouldn't be, so I think it's a perfectly valid opinion to have to like the Wii so much. But I'm just telling you why I personally disagree with it.
Number 5 is that I think Crash Bandicoot is a better game than Super Mario 64.
I mean, I guess that does also just come down to taste, but I don't see how. Mario 64, in my opinion, is drastically better. It's got a much more open environment, it's a lot less linear, because Crash I've always felt was kind of too linear. Don't get me wrong, I love Crash, but Mario just is such a better game in my opinion. On the other hand, I do think that they are kind of two different games. Like, I get that they're both technically 3D platformers, but I also feel like they were going for completely different genres and demographics. So I think comparing the two is an interesting choice, but since we are, no, I completely disagree. Mario 64 is way better. It had more fun boss battles, it was more intuitive, it was less linear, and it had a bigger world. Well, maybe not a bigger world, but a more open world, where you could just kind of, do things in your own order.
I can't begin to describe how many people love Super Mario 64 way more than Crash Bandicoot. I played both of these games back in the day. I played Crash when I was 3, and I played Mario 64 when I was about 5 years old. And from playing both of these video games, even back then, I still thought Crash Bandicoot was a better game. And to this day, I think I can finally understand why. The problem I had had with Super Mario 64 was not only did the game get a little bit repetitive, but the controls and camera are so dated.
Literally every game from that time period has bad camera, but I never really got bothered by the controls of Mario 64. And, I don't think Crash particularly had a specifically great camera either, or controls. I think that they were both just kind of standard for the time. So I think that that's a strange distinction to make, but okay. Not to mention, I also think that both games can be repetitive, sure. I think all games are inherently at least slightly repetitive. But I never got the feeling that Mario 64 was super repetitive, because there's plenty of variety in the ways you get stars. There's the Bowser fights, which themselves are very repetitive, sure, because you just pick them up and throw them into bombs. But, no, I completely disagree. If anything, I think Crash is more repetitive just because of how linear it is and you're just smashing boxes.
I get that this was 1996, but Crash Bandicoot just did this much better than Mario 64 did. Now, I know that could be a bit of an unfair comparison because Crash Bandicoot is a linear platformer while Super Mario 64 is an open-world 3D platformer.
Okay, well, I mean, at least he acknowledges that.
And while I definitely appreciate Super Mario 64 for being revolutionary, that doesn't mean I have to like the game.
Wait, are you saying you don't like the game? What's not to like? I mean, I understand liking Crash better, but you don't like the game?
The music I actually think is better than Super Mario 64.
See, once again, I think that's down to a matter of taste, but I also completely disagree. I think Mario 64 has one of the best, most iconic soundtracks out of any game. Don't get me wrong, I like the Crash soundtrack, but no, I don't see it, dude.
Really, the only thing I liked about Mario 64 a lot was the music. Everything else is meh.
What the fuck?
That's the only thing you liked about Mario 64? What the fuck?
Yeah, this is my number one. And if you weren't mad at me before, you're certainly gonna get mad at me now. What's my number one unpopular opinion? I think Mario Kart 64 is the most overrated video game I've ever played.
Shut up!
Oh god, the amount of love that Mario Kart 64 has gotten over the past few years just really sickens me.
Why does it sicken you? It's a fucking great game, and I understand not liking it, especially maybe compared to some of the later Mario Karts that have more features. But saying that the love that it gets sickens you just sounds a bit like an asshole thing to say. Like, I'm not trying to be a dick here saying that, but that's kind of an asshole thing to say.
I've seen top 10 lists of Mario Kart games. People put it as number 2 or even number 1.
And I'd personally be one of those people. Mario Kart 64 is the one that I tend to have the most fun with. It's my favorite of the Mario Kart games. To me, it kind of shows that sometimes less is more. Because the less features and stuff make it so that you're, constrained to what it does have, and what it does have is great. I don't know. For me, it's one that I have the most fun with, so I'm in that same camp that you're talking about there.
I personally disagree on all of those statements because I think Mario Kart 64 is a bad video game.
See, again, I understand not thinking it's as good as some of the others, but I don't understand completely calling it a bad video game. I think that's very strange, but okay.
Now, bear with me here. I'm not saying Mario Kart 64 is the worst video game I've ever played, but out of all the video games I've played that are considered really, really good, Mario Kart 64 is the most overrated one.
I don't know. You talked about Minecraft earlier, and I'd say that's much more overrated. But okay.
I played this game back when I was a little kid, and even back then I had a lot of problems with this game.
I'm a press X to doubt on that one, because I don't think a kid would have a lot of problems with it, because kids aren't that critical of games and stuff like that. They just kind of play it and have fun. I'm not going to say that you maybe didn't like it as a kid. You might not have liked it as a kid, sure. But you've used that argument a couple of times already, and I don't get it. I don't think it adds anything to it, because kids aren't particularly critical of things, so maybe you did have a problem with it, but I don't know. I just don't think that adds anything to the conversation, personally.
Let's get through my first major issue with the game, the CPU. While I get that Mario Kart 64 is primarily a multiplayer game, you also have to make sure that the single player is fun as well. When you don't do that, the single player can be a very bad experience, and Mario Kart 64 is no exception. The AI in this game is so bad, and not like, oh, they're stupid kind of bad, I mean unfairly bad. I couldn't last 1 minute in first place because the AI have this sort of rubber band AI thing.
I don't get that. Because I'm actually quite good at Mario Kart 64, and I suck dick at racing games, so I don't want to be that guy, but have you ever thought of just, getting good trademark?
I get the point of Mario Kart that it's chaos, but still, it's single player. You have to win, just so you can win something.
No. Video games, you don't have to win just because it's single player. That would defeat the purpose of having a challenge in games, dude.
But Super Mario Kart was a better game in my opinion.
I'm gonna have to hardcore disagree with you there, because Super Mario Kart is janky as fuck. I'm not the biggest fan of Super Mario Kart. I understand that it's a fun enough game as it is, but it's the most janky Mario Kart game, and I've never put, like, an extended period of time into it, because every time I start playing it, it's too janky. So, I'm gonna have to hardcore disagree with you there. No, Super Mario Kart is not a better game than Mario Kart 64. And he was saying this in the context of controls, and I completely disagree. But that's pretty much it for his first video. He went on a little bit more about Mario Kart 64, but he was more or less just kind of touching on the same points. So let's move on to the other video he did later on called 10 More Unpopular Opinions.
それじゃあビデオ見てもらいます。ねんなよ。
And you know what? I realize it's actually a lot of fun to talk about unpopular opinions, so I figured I'm gonna do it again, because there's nothing better than stirring up some anger from people. You guys know the drill, it's my opinion, don't try to get too angry, yada yada yada. I'm sure some of you are used to it at this point. Or if you're a new viewer, then I apologize for not explaining it to you. And let me tell you, if you thought some of my opinions in that video were bad, some of the ones in this are gonna make you wanna kill me. But arguably the most important aspect of a video game system, aside from the games it has, is the controller, the only way to transport you into the world of video games. And because of that, developers have to put their time and care into making a controller as comfortable and iconic as they can bloody be. With that said, I think the N64 controller is one of the most overhated controllers of all time. Now, do I think the N64 controller is great? God no. It does have a lot of design flaws, but when it comes to other video game controllers, I don't think it's that bad.
Again, I'm gonna have to agree. I do think it has its problems, but I definitely don't think it's as bad as it gets made out to be. So once again, a very sensible opinion. I think that that's a very good take, in my opinion.
One of the main complaints the controller gets is, it's weird because it has 3 prongs instead of 2, so your hands aren't all in the right places. Oh, I can't touch the buttons. Except here's the thing. Not every N64 game was built for you to touch all of those buttons. Nintendo knew about the limitations of the N64 controller and designed each game with a different playstyle. That's actually one of my favorite things about the N64 controller, the different playstyles it inherits. You can hold the controller on the right, the center, the left, even for FPS games, which don't always work well with this controller, but the creativity is what I like the most about it. And
all excellent points. Again, this guy is doing a great job on this, and I think his production quality has improved greatly on this video as well, if you can't tell. Because there was a 3-year difference between these two videos.
However, the one argument I will agree with people on is that the joystick has not aged very well. Why they thought plastic rubbing against plastic was a good idea, I have no idea, but...
And again, that's also a great point. Like I said, it has its flaws too, so, again... Everything on this part I completely agree with, so let's move on.
And we now live in an era where 4K resolutions are a thing for movies now, and sooner or later we could be getting into 8K resolutions. It's incredible. With that said though, I think actually buying movies in 4K is a pain in the ass. Now,
I agree, it is super expensive, you need a special player, you need a special TV, it's ridiculous. I haven't watched to see what all of his points are. He'll probably make some of those same points, but I agree. 4K is an annoying format that I personally don't have a ton of interest in buying.
When it comes to actually buying these movies in 4K, the prices sometimes can be just ridiculous.
Yes, they can. It's like $10 more in a lot of cases. It's ridiculously overpriced.
Now let's compare those prices to 4K versions, in which Toy Story and Men in Black are both $24, Forrest Gump goes from $12 to $25, and The Force Awakens goes from $15 to $30, rounding out at $104. All
4K costs way too fucking much. Like I said, there's a reason that I don't buy it. Well, that's one of the reasons. Like I said, there's others, but I'm sure he'll get to them too.
And what makes this even funnier is that a lot of movies released in 4K aren't even true 4K, just upscaled 2K content.
See, that's another excellent point that I forgot to bring up when I was going on my rant about it here. So yeah, again, another excellent point. the 4K quote-unquote releases, a lot of the times are just upscaled, so the fact that they charge so much more is ridiculous.
And I don't think they're worth it, since I can buy these same movies in 4K on a digital service and they're way cheaper.
See, I agree with him in concept on that, but I also, again, don't really condone buying digitally. I do occasionally buy digitally, obviously, but I don't think that that should be a move that we all make, because eventually it'll phase out physical media, which is bound to happen eventually, because that's how the trajectory of things have been going, but I don't want it to happen anytime soon, which is why I buy everything physically when I buy stuff, if possible. Okay, so surprisingly he didn't touch on the other issues, so I will here. As I said, you do need to buy a TV that is compatible with 4K. You need to buy a 4K player, so that's already another issue. On top of that, 4K to me, honestly, doesn't look that much better than, 1080p. It does look better. It looks a lot better, to be fair. But it's, not enough that it really concerns me enough to actually care. The actual resolution of a movie, provided it's not, 144p or 360p, I don't care. I think that as long as it's viewable, it doesn't bother me. I'm not very big on really caring what the resolution of something is, personally. I realize that can be a big thing for a lot of people, but for me, it's just not. So although that's not a point he made, I thought I would make it here in addition to that, because that's how I personally feel about 4K, is that it's completely unnecessary.
I'll keep this part short and brief because I already made a video explaining my problems with this movie, but Ralph Breaks the Internet is still a bad movie.
I thought this was unpopular opinions. Do people really like that piece of shit? Because Ralph Breaks the Internet was absolute ass. I fucking despise that movie. So if that's an unpopular opinion, I'm shocked. Because I have not met a single person I know who thinks it's actually, yes I have. I have met a single person I know who likes it. And that same person also says that The Last of Us 2 is better than The Last of Us 1. And I actually plan to have that person on a special episode of the Team Red Eye Shit Show soon to come. But, yeah, I guess that is the one person I know who really likes Wreck-It Ralph 2. So there you go.
I don't hate it as much as I used to, or as much as other people do, but I still consider it one of Disney's weakest films. Especially when you consider that I'm a big fan of the first movie and all the worlds and characters it brought forward.
Yeah, exactly. It was an insult to the first movie. I think that was one of my biggest problems with it, is the first one was great. The first one was actually one of the only 3D Disney movies I like. Because Disney's 3D animated movies have not personally tickled my fancy, but I do like Wreck-It Ralph, and I like Tangled. Those are pretty much the only two that I like.
Like how Ralph goes from a typical everyday grump to a very clingy and overprotective best friend.
Yes, I agree. The weird clinginess about him was very cringy in this movie.
The fact that Turbo never gets mentioned once despite the themes this movie's going for.
That's an excellent point. I hadn't even thought of that. But yeah, that was actually a very important point that I didn't even think about. They should have made that comparison.
Aside from Ralph, which I already mentioned, Vanellope just comes off as a bit too selfish in how she wants to leave her game, which is understandable, but never considers the consequences. And 2 years after this movie's release, it already feels dated with all the internet product placement.
Yeah, I agree. They ruined a lot of the characters and made them not likable, and all of the weird internet stuff was cringy when it came out, and it was already outdated. Because they had they literally had a show in the movie called Meme It, and I physically cringed when I saw that.
Some people prefer turn-based RPGs. I don't. I cannot get into turn-based RPG. Throw me an action RPG game like Kingdom Hearts and I'll get right into that shit.
So I'm going to keep this one short and sweet, although I personally do kind of agree. I'm not the biggest fan of turn-based RPGs. I do like quite a few turn-based RPGs, and I think that turn-based RPGs have a reason to exist. There's quite a few of them that are quite good, but I do think the combat style of turn-based is kind of frustrating at times. I do think it can be done well. Like South Park, The Stick of Truth, and Fractured But Whole, I think did a pretty decent job at doing it. I think that games like Chrono Trigger and Earthbound do it really well. But I do kind of agree with what he's saying. But I don't have a strong enough opinion on this to go on a whole tirade about it, so we're just gonna move on.
I like The Simpsons. Sorry, let me reiterate. I used to like The Simpsons, and that shouldn't really come as a surprise. Many people consider the older days of The Simpsons to be great, and on top of that, many iconic characters like Homer, Mr. Burns, Groundskeeper Willie, Apu, Krusty, Grandpa, Moe, Principal Skinner. There are so many Simpsons characters that I like and consider iconic. And I know that most of the time when all of these characters are on screen, I'm gonna have a great time. Unless there's a certain 10-year-old boy a part of it. I don't know how much hate I'm gonna generate by saying this, but I don't like Bart Simpson. I don't hate him, I just don't like him.
I kind of get that. I do think Bart is actually a little bit overrated, but personally I think Bart's still a pretty decent character. He's certainly not my favorite Simpsons character, and he's probably not even in my top 5 Simpsons characters, but I do still like him. So I do get where you're coming from on that.
When it comes to Simpsons characters popularly considered to be the best, Bart is often at the top of those lists.
Yeah, with him being at the top of those lists, I agree. I don't understand it. He is overrated.
I have 2 core issues with Bart as a character. The first being is that I don't find him very funny. And this is a major problem with a comedy show like The Simpsons, but if one of your characters isn't that funny, then you fail to find the humor in them. Most people like to consider Bart as sort of a satire on the bad boy trope, except I don't really find anything that unique about him. Most of his jokes just seem to be, ha 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 ha, look, he's doing something really evil. Isn't that funny? Oh look, he said hell and bitch, that's funny.
I mean, I personally do find him funny, but I do think it is a little bit unfair when you're talking about the bad boy trope thing, because when The Simpsons started in the late 80s, 89 specifically is when they first appeared on the Tracy Ullman show, I think it is a bit unfair to say that Bart, is unoriginal, whereas he was kind of the original bad boy trope character. So I think that is a little unfair. I do think maybe over time he became kind of repetitive, but I think when he started he was kind of innovative. He was kind of a unique character because it was the early 90s, late 80s, so I think that is a little unfair.
But the second core issue I have with Bart, which is actually my main issue with him as a character, he's a character I fail to sympathize with.
I would say in modern Simpsons, I fail to sympathize with pretty much every character, but in classic Simpsons, I don't see how you can. Because Bart is very sympathetic earlier on. Like, he's a bad boy trademark, but he has a heart. In the earlier seasons, you can see him as a genuine, kid who's maybe a little bit of a troubled child, sure, but, like, he genuinely has things that make you sympathetic towards him. For instance, in Bart the Lover, he plays this awful prank on Edna by making her think that she has this distant boyfriend named Woodrow. Then he feels really bad for it when he sees how much he destroyed her, and he does everything to make it up to her. He goes completely out of his way to make things right. You can also see a lot of bonding in the earlier seasons between Bart and Lisa, Bart and Marge, and Bart and Homer. So I think that's unfair to say that you can't sympathize with Bart, because earlier on, there's plenty to sympathize with.
Because of his bad boy nature, there are a lot of episodes in the show where Bart does some really horrible things that fail to make me see anything worthwhile about him. Like, remember the episode where he basically ruins Lisa's friendship with a bunch of kids on summer vacation because he was jealous?
Yes, I do, and that's actually a good example of why to sympathize with him, because at the end of the episode he makes it right by going and getting all of those friends to come back and hang out with Lisa, and say goodbye to her and, like, do all this nice sweet stuff. Like, the ending of that episode makes up for it.
Or how about the episode where he places an Australian boy with a massive phone bill and later brings a bullfrog to the country, which ends up destroying the crops, effectively ruining the entire country, and he doesn't give a shit about it.
You're really talking bad about Bart vs. Australia? That's one of the best episodes of the series. I fucking love that episode. It's funny as shit.
While I don't like Bart, I don't hate him either, because he does have a few episodes where I actually do sympathize with him. Everybody's talked about that episode where he loses a baseball game and everybody hates him for it. As much as I don't like him, even I think the torment he goes through in that episode is way too far.
I'm glad you at least acknowledge that, but yeah, no, I think that's more often than not how it was in the older seasons, so,
And when there are episodes where he's rarely acting like a rebellious kid and more as an average 10-year-old boy, he's actually pretty likable. Like the episode from season 4 where he falls in love with his neighbor from next door.
Yeah, New Kid on the Block is a great episode.
Now let's talk about a show that everybody likes that I don't. And funny enough, it's one of those shows that I don't think really get much disdain from some people, which may be a first for me. So what's the show I don't like? Well...
So I'm just going to say this quick, because I'm not going to do a whole lot on this one, because Gumball's a show I'm more or less indifferent to. I kind of agree that it's very, very overrated. But here's the thing, it has a lot of high highs. There's some really fucking great episodes, there's some great fucking characters, and some really standout jokes. But it's a show that I'm more or less indifferent to, so I don't have a whole lot to say, so let's move on.
I actually like Hawaiian pizza.
Same, actually. I've never understood why people hate pineapple on pizza. I think it's pretty good. It does a good combination of the savory and sweet. I love it, so I've never understood the hate either.
I hate modern gaming.
I also hate modern gaming. Hey, there we go.
I'm sorry. I'm not a fan of modern gaming, and most of the games that release nowadays just don't leave the same impact as ones that released many years ago. And compared to the generation we had before, it doesn't hold the same candle.
I completely agree. Gaming has sort of lost its feel and touch that it used to have. Now it just feels kind of generic and shat out like any other entertainment industry.
The video game market has shifted so much that developers no longer focus on trying to make their games fun and enjoyable, but rather just making them for a quick buck.
Absolutely. Gaming companies have become very greedy and only want to maximize profit, which is why things like microtransactions have become so fucking prevalent.
I have several points to prove so. Firstly, a lot of modern games look the same. A lot of FPS games look the same, a lot of sandbox games look the same, a lot of story-driven games look the same. It's gotten to the point where there's rarely any more games that exist that try to have their own distinct style.
While I do agree, I am going to play devil's advocate and say it is maybe a little bit unfair because nothing anymore is wholly original, but I do agree that everything does kind of feel kind of the same now.
It's because technology has evolved so much that developers don't have to put in that little extra cash to make something look distinct. Back when consoles used to be limited in technology, developers had to get creative to work around the limitation.
Yes, hence the expression less is more. I completely agree.
Because so many developers don't care about that artistic integrity, they just care about making their games look pretty, and as a result, they just look the same. Thus meaning that most games made in the modern age don't stand the test of time. In 2020, people are still talking about games like Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie or Jak and Daxter, because these games were made to stand the test of time with how iconic they are.
Yeah, those games are all fantastic, and I completely 100% agree, although I think it's kind of funny because I know you said earlier that you didn't like Super Mario 64, so just thought I'd bring that up too.
When a game releases nowadays, there are often people that will make a big deal about it coming out because they're excited to play it, and then when those games are released, people will rarely start to talk about it anymore, because they're not interesting, they're not iconic, they don't push the limits, they're just another generic game with some old engine being re-released for cash. And let's not begin to mention the countless amounts of games that focus primarily on a deep narrative-driven story rather than the gameplay. You know, games like The Last of Us or the recent God of War.
Okay, time to give my own hot take. I actually care more about narrative than gameplay in a lot of cases. I'm much more into the story-based games. That said, I do think gameplay is an important factor, and if you want a game to be replayable, fun, and enjoyable, you do have to have good gameplay. But in my opinion, story does actually a lot of the times take precedent, although it does depend on the genre of game we're talking. For instance, Doom Eternal is super light on story, but it's easily my favorite game of the year. And that's because it has such great gameplay. So I do think that they go hand in hand, but I do think that narrative-driven games can be fantastic.
But with how much money these games are making nowadays, there's also no longer a desire to polish these games, because publishers are so focused on wanting to release these games annually so they can get that hard-earned cash.
I completely agree, and another problem that goes hand in hand with that is because they don't polish it, they're just like, oh, it's fine, we can release a patch, that'll fix it. How about you finish the game before you release it? That'd be nice. How about we don't need all these goddamn patches to make a game work that should have worked at launch? I couldn't agree more.
And I'm not saying all modern games are bad. In fact, one of my favorite aspects of the modern era are the indie games, because these developers try to make these games distinct. There's a reason people are still talking about Cuphead. There are reasons that people are still talking about Celeste, because these games push the limit and try to be unique.
Yeah, I agree. The indie game market has actually thrived in modern gaming, and that is one positive for sure. And that's about all there really is to cover. Turns out I agreed with more than I disagreed with on these lists, which I kind of thought in the first place, but I thought they were worthy enough to do a video on anyway. So yeah, Yoshi Player, great underrated YouTuber. Looks like he is rising up a little bit, but there you go. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description, and you can go check him out. But anyway, I think that's it for today. This has been Fugitive Red Eye. Toodles.
You go home now! I'm gonna fucking die here, Jack!
Suck it, you shit!